So you've got 15 seconds to state your question, and then it will open it up to the cast.
Yeah.
3, 2, 1.
Well, it's great we've got all these wonderful domestic leagues now. My biggest concern is that we're losing international players for more lucrative deals, and as a result, international cricket will become weaker. What's the solution?
Okay, so I'm tipping you're thinking of Deandra Dotton, Shabnim Ismail, who's recently retired, Dane van Niekerk. How do we keep those players within their national boards while all these domestic competitions are going on? You've got your eyebrows raised.
Oh. It's a tough one. It's a similar situation in the men's game now because they're being lured by professional contracts with franchise cricket and talk of having all year round contracts. So for the women, you can completely understand. You know, for a South African player, they get paid more for 2-3 weeks in a competition like Fairbreak than they do in their whole year round contract. So completely understand why they might want to try and do that. Certainly with the amount of money they do get paid at home. So look, I think it's on boards to be accountable for what they're doing. You know, should they be issuing NOCs? Absolutely they should, to allow their players to play around the world. The ICC also needs to be governing things. Does there need to be a separate pot of money ring-fenced for the women? Because there are certain boards struggling around the world to really fund their women's programs, but also accountability. I think a set list of criteria of the basic structures that need to be in place for players to be paid well.
You just hit the nail on the head. For a lot of points there, funding is one. I mean, of course, if there was more funding within the national boards, that they would be more inclined to stay and play international cricket. And I totally agree. If you have got the WPL playing upwards of £300,000, well, $300,000 or $400,000, you're going to be lured towards that deal. One thing that you can do in the women's game, though, is manipulate the calendar better than you can in the men's game. So actually you can section off, because a lot of these franchise tournaments are relatively new, I think you can sort the calendar out a little bit better, and so that there is less or fewer conflicts between international and domestic cricket.
I think there's an argument too as whether you need some sort of equalisation for international player pay, because you've got boards with different amounts of money on a vastly different scale. You have Australians on a couple of $100,000 a year playing a Pakistan team on a few $1,000s a year.
Correct.
There's the disparity in that is so massive. Does there need to be some sort of thought? Everybody's in it together to a point. If you have a World Cup, you need all the teams involved. If you have bilateral cricket, you need other teams to play. But if your other teams are being paid a fraction of what the three richest teams are getting paid, it's such an unequal system. Why would you want to keep being a South Africa player or a Pakistan player aside from pride?
So does the responsibility fall with the ICC to make sure they govern that?
Well, to at least have the conversations about whether there needs to be some sort of centralisation of funds you wouldn't have full equalisation, but to maybe smooth out the disparity somewhat.
We've timed that absolutely perfectly. That was a good start. Keep it going. While you've got the mic, I'm going to start you on your 15-second timer. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, good news stories despite the system, maybe. Rwanda, Thailand, Brazil, teams like that. What can be done to support more emerging teams like that, to support those teams, but to help create other success stories at the same time?
I know what I'd do. And in the sense that I was at the Under-19 T20 World Cup for the women over in South Africa, and one of the most joyous things, and look, the standard at the sides at the lower end of the Associate Nations, of course, wasn't good. That kind of wasn't the point. It was the fact that they were there and playing and enjoying it, and we absolutely loved covering them. Mine's a little bit of a radical suggestion. I know funding comes from a lot through the men's side of things. If I am Rwanda, if I am the United States, if I am Thailand, I'm forgetting the men's competition completely. There is more chance of having success and actually being much more relevant in the women's game than there is the men's game. So for whatever kind of funding you do get, and it is minimal now, we've seen the way that the funding is split, I would be tempted to plunge all of my money into the development of the women's game rather than the men's.
In a way, that is what Thailand have done. They professionalised their women's team.
I would spread. I would go do that elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean that seems like a model that could be followed. Brazil have been similar. They've recognised more opportunity, more headroom to develop.
I think that's also an example to South Africa, West Indies, New Zealand. They invest more money in your women's programme, so international cricket does become stronger. And I think it's such a great example, I think, of what they're doing in those countries.
And I think if you change the system slightly where it's not attached to full member nations and associate nations rankings on the men's and give a separate system, then all of a sudden the funding comes through a little bit more for those nations. And Thailand was a perfect example in the qualifiers where they missed out because of a ranking system.
It leads perfectly onto your question, Mel.
Oh, does it? You're moving me on. Are we happy? I love it.
Well, no, I had it ticking down, so I was like...
Within time, haven't we? We've alarmingly stayed within time.
We'll move on because mine might take a little bit longer as well. Okay, I'm going to count myself down, or are you going to count me down?
3, 2, 1, go.
There we go. Afghanistan. So, full member nation, yet part of the criteria for being a full member nation is you have a women's team and also a women's program. They have none at the moment. How do we look at getting the Afghanistan women's cricket team back into the system?
Well, I mean, it's such a thorny question, and there has been so much back and forth about whether it's better to try to keep them partly involved, to keep the men's team going as some sort of inspiration for people in Afghanistan who are doing it really tough under the Taliban. But I think at some point with difficult questions, you have to come up with simple answers, and the simple rule is that you have to have a women's team to be an ICC member. Either you change the rule or you change the membership. You can't have both at the same time, which is what the ICC are doing at the moment.
It's a really complex situation. I know, Mel, you've been involved with Cricket Australia previously in being able to repatriate some of these players. But firstly, for me, it's the voice. You know, we've heard a lot from the men's side about what's good for the men's game and supporting the men's players. But what about the women? What do they want?
Well, they want to play, so there's no doubt about it. Most of them are in Australia, there's some in Canada and England. But what they want to do, they were contracted players at one stage, looking forward to playing internationally with the Afghanistan flag on their shirt. That's been taken away from them now. What they would like is an opportunity to collectively come together, try out for the team again. They don't expect to get straight into the A side, but have some sort of mechanism around it where they can base themselves out of Afghanistan at the moment and still have that opportunity of playing.
I think the simple answer is exactly right, what Jeff has said. I'm sorry, that's the rule.
Yeah.
That's the rule. We want to watch the Afghanistan women's team play. They are desperate to play. They want to be involved. If no one, and there's a lot of pussyfooting around on this particular topic, it's time to stop that. Oh, well, what about this and what about that? I'm sorry. This is the rule and the criteria for being a full ICC member. So, therefore, if you do not have the capacity to have a women's team, that's taken away from you. And that is as simple, and that makes as much larger statement to the world about where cricket stands regarding the women's team.
At the same time, though, there needs to be support, doesn't there? So where does that support come from to try and make this all happen?
What they have at the moment is a vastly increased financial windfall coming with the new ICC rights deal. Afghanistan will be getting much more money than ever before, and they'll be spending $0 of it on a women's program. They have no interest in doing so, but they have no lever to make them do so. The ICC has shown no interest. It's the weakness of having a member organisation rather than a body that actually runs the game. The ICC doesn't make decisions. The member bodies make decisions, and enough of the other members don't care about this. It's not a priority for them. They're happy to let it slide, and that's why we're seeing the Afghanistan board and the Taliban be able to get away with what they're doing.
So you're basically saying the member nations need to be stronger?
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolute moral failing, and it's an indictment on those member nations that they're not willing to enforce their own criteria.
Okay. Flex your muscle, independent or full member nations and associate nations as well. Ish, you ready?
Yes.
3, 2,
am
1.
I on the clock? Okay. Amazing what's happening in the women's game at the moment. Really good at the top level. We're seeing a lot more influx of investment, and certainly for the players. How do we manage that transition, though? Because it is happening so fast. You've got a player suddenly not earning any money to suddenly earning 100 grand for 3 weeks working in IPL.
You would see that a lot, Lottie.
Yeah, I absolutely do, and that's why a lot more money is being invested in psychology in the women's game, because certainly at the level I coach at, I'm seeing it, because you're suddenly having players who are getting professional contracts. But then I'm seeing it at WPL level. Some of these players are earning a serious amount of money. How do they deal with that? And psychology now is massive within the women's game, and the resources now, which the ECB have invested in, which is great, is I think so important moving forward.
Yeah, psychology is really important. Player bodies, I think, are really important to help support that transition. The global player body, for boards that don't have player bodies, where are they getting that support? Yeah. Are there programs in place to support the players from a mental health point of view? I also think coaches and leaders are really important in how they manage that within the dressing room.
I wonder what it does for player relationships as well, where you've got players, say, in a national team, you've got some who aren't getting picked up in an auction, some getting picked up for 30,000, some getting picked up for 300,000. It must create tensions, it must create resentment and unhappiness at different levels. And then you've got the association effect, so a player on $500,000 and another player in their team, people think they're both loaded now, but actually only one of them is.
But
it's
actually,
really difficult.
That was happening during the World T20. We spoke to Heather Knight, and the WPL auction was actually happening as England were playing, and questions are getting run. Oh, what's X gone for? What's Y gone for?
And they could hear
surprise.
the Indian
And
team next door.
Exactly right. So the Indian
Whooping
team
and
were
hollering.
whooping and celebrating wildly at some of the contracts they were getting. And look, and I totally agree, is that this has gone from naught to a lot in a very, very short space of time. And as much as we say it is great and it's fantastic and they're getting remunerated in the way that elite international athletes should be, but there is the other side of it. I totally agree that there has to be some way of dealing with it, both for that particular person and also within the team environment as well. And it's something that needs to be looked at.
Corporate sponsors are coming into the game and they're investing money, but we need to make sure we're looking after the players as well as they drive forwards. And those mental health provisions are really important. Just around agents as well. They're circling, and players don't necessarily know how to react to that. So where can they go to make sure they are getting supported and getting the right advice?
Right, and I think there are always more have-nots than there are haves, and you see this in the men's IPL as well. The lowest tier contracts, if you play the full season, you're not actually on a lot of money. You're getting through, and by the time you've lost a chunk to tax and a chunk to the agent and all the rest of it, you're not on riches. And so most of the players are still in that position. Whereas it's only the few at the top that we're talking about what Ash Gardner's deal or what Nat Sivabrunt's deal is.
Okay, so we've talked T20 cricket, franchise cricket, we've touched on governance, we've touched on the investment in the game. Let's touch on the game that we're actually talking about now, which is Test match cricket. Daggers, do you have a question on that?
I like this game. It's fantastic. I love Test match cricket. Here's what I want, something that maybe I can't have. I want every women's international series to be multi-format. I want there to be Test cricket. I want domestic cricket to have long-form 2-day games. And should this be worth 4 points or 2?
Wow, you're getting greedy now. You want it
I
all,
am
don't
getting
you?
greedy, but I only have 15 seconds, and over to you.
Lottie.
Well, I absolutely agree, and I've been saying it probably for a few years, that every series should be this format, because I think it encourages every team to play Test cricket. What was your second point, Daggers?
We should have been listening there, Lottie. The second point was domestic structure. I'd like to see perhaps 2-day cricket, the old minor counties, maybe 50 over.
And that's something we're all looking at in
Two
England
innings
at the
cricket.
moment. We're looking to play some 2 or 3 day cricket between regions because we want to prepare these girls for this type of cricket. We've talked a lot about the inexperience. That's how they get experience. And should it be worth 4? Yes, it should.
How do you do it though for countries that don't have a proper domestic structure though? Can you still play a multi-format series there?
Well, it's tough, isn't it? Because I haven't got that structure, and that's what we need them to do. We need them to get a domestic structure in place. But yeah, it is tough.
Inherently, every team playing women's Test cricket is going into it with no experience and no preparation to play women's Test cricket. It doesn't matter which team it is. If you're coming out to bowl on the third morning, having gone across the first couple of days, you're doing 90 overs a day, you're exhausted, you don't have that experience as a women's player. There is nowhere to get it. You can only play one-day cricket and T20 cricket. So it is unreasonable. We're judging these players on their performances. Wasn't very accurate on morning 4. I mean, it's completely outrageous to expect them to be able to do.
It has actually gone backwards though, because when we played, we would actually bowl with a red ball in 50 over cricket, whereas these days they only bowl with the white ball. So whether that's something that could be reintroduced, colour, going back to bowling with a red ball and creams, maybe different coloured trousers but like cream tops.
That bell isn't for us. Keep going. It comes back to the investment piece then, isn't it? So if all of a sudden there's more money coming into each nation, it's still then up to the nations to say where they want to invest that money. So is it in the grassroots level? Is it in getting contracts for the current players? Or is it into Test match cricket?
My point's about the point system. Should a Test match be worth 4 points for a format that the women don't necessarily play? I'm just throwing it out there. I'm not saying yes or no, but should it be worth that amount of points?
Is that because it's at the start of the competition?
Should it be at the start of the competition?
Yeah.
Should it be bang in the middle, or should it be should it be right at the end?
It's just a matter of how much work you have to do to get through a test match, I suppose. If you do it and you win it and you've done 5 days of effort, you want more than you get for 40 overs one night next week.
In essence, for argument's sake, look at the Ashes. Should Australia win this test, England have to win then 5 out of 6 white ball games in formats that, yes, they're used to playing a little bit more. Should it be 4 out of 6 if it's 2 points?
We've never got the system right with the multi-format thing, though. We've had so
Used to
many
be
goes
6,
at
didn't
it.
it?
It used to
10
be
seconds,
6
they should go
when you played,
I like
Charlotte.
it though. It's set up beautifully. Australia have a chance to dictate terms. England can come back into this test match, pick up wickets. It's all going to come down to the final day, and whoever wins deserves the 4 points.
There we go. Whew. In a word, is the state of the game, the health of the women's global game, in a good position at the moment?
It's in a good position, could be better.
Okay, could be better.
Echo that.
Echo that.
Don't think it's as simple as good or bad.